Dr. Ibrahim, on behalf of the Center for Strategic Philanthropy at Cambridge University's Judge Business School, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me, a novice interviewer, so please bear with me, on the changing nature of strategic philanthropy within some of the world's fastest growing regions. Dr. Mo Ibrahim is, of course, the founder and chair of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which was established, I think, in 2006. And is laser focused on supporting good governance and exceptional leadership on the African continent. Dr. Ibrahim has also had a very successful career in business, of course, especially in the telecoms sector. And I'm very interested to get your views also on the intersection of technology and philanthropy a little later in our conversation. However, I'd like to begin with a subject that goes right to the heart of why the Center for Strategic Philanthropy was created in the first place, and why we believe that its mission is so timely. So, a number of the fastest growing economies in the world, as you know, are on the African continent. A lot of wealth is being generated very quickly. Are you witnessing a rise in the number of individuals and families, perhaps, from these countries that are becoming involved in philanthropy?
Not really. Unfortunately, philanthropy in Africa, and I would say in the Arab world as well, is not really widespread. And we had a number of conversations about this with many friends. And it appears to me philanthropy, or a form of philanthropy in the region, is really focused on relatives, families, and the immediate community around the world. Philanthropy by nature is giving really for people you never know and you'll never meet. You're giving in principle.
Selfless.
Absolutely, in principle. People you never see, and you will never see. But somehow, culturally speaking, in Africa, we have this concept of, extended families. A family in Africa is probably composed of 300-400 people. And whoever gets a little bit well off will start by looking after those people. Mm-hmm. People are very cooperative, and in the African culture, I mean, if you live in a village and you need to rebuild your house or your hut or whatever, everybody will come to help build it. You have a problem with your kettle, you have people really were. It's not strange because of the lack of social safety nets. Mm-hmm. None of our African countries have any adequate social programs or safety nets. So people look after each other, but the way they do it is to look after each other within their own community, their own village, their own extended family. Mm. And that, yes, it's great. It's a form of cooperation, a form of help, but is not exactly philanthropy as we define philanthropy. The Arab world is similar as well, and the only time people will step outside the extended family, they will generally do something like build a mosque. That's the only time I notice people will, in general, go out of the extended family and build a mosque. And I always argue with them, guys, we have a lot of mosques actually. And maybe we should start to look after some more needy people. And I think God will reward you more for doing that. But it's a question of culture.
Right. And as an extension to that question, I guess, would you then say that the practice of institutional philanthropy is relatively nascent or a very early stage, and the general attitudes towards governance of the sector, would you say, is something that requires more work? Or is there at least a trend in that direction?
Actually, it's not much in our regions, because as I said, it is not really a recognized institution as
Mm.
such.
Mhm.
And if the flooding in the country, the president will make an appeal to ask the well-off people to help give the government some money in order to look after some people. This is a form of social, what I call that, social cooperation. Or, but we don't have that concept of, I mean, even the concept of NGOs, although it's started now, civil society started to rise slowly, but mainly focusing in areas around politics, around corruption, around human rights, etc. This is the scene in our countries. I remember I was having a discussion with Bill Gates, who was doing the Giving Pledge, and he was telling me he traveled to Saudi Arabia, he traveled to the Gulf, and he said, look, I mean, there's a lot of billionaires in the region, and we cannot find people who are willing to join us. And what is wrong? And I tried to explain to him, it's not necessarily wrong, but people have completely different approach to generosity than what you have. Although I must say I was a little bit ashamed. I think our well-off people are not really looking beyond their noses.
Yeah. And this is, I think this is really, as they say, therein lies the opportunity, right? Because I think the more and more people in these regions of the world, and of course, as you said, the African continent is not on its own in this respect, but as more of these regions really identify with the business case, if you will, behind institutionalization and professionalization. And again, realizing that institutionalization does not mean bureaucracy necessarily, right? It could also mean streamlining, but it can also strengthen the whole essence of what it is you're doing, the whole practice, and ultimately lead to improved and enhanced impact. I think the more and more we realize and accept that, the more and more hopefully we will see more institutionalized and well-governed practice of philanthropy.
This is
Yes.
wonderful, and I love the word strategic in your center, because that is really important. It's not just
absolutely.
giving. There must be a strategy behind the giving. And
absolutely.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. No, a strategy behind, I think, not just the practice of giving, but the follow through and the focus and really discipline around impact and what that means. And holding oneself accountable for that impact. And as you said, not just leaving it to God to figure out how that money is going to be spent. You're absolutely right. Going to, your foundation publishes an annual index of African governance, concerned, of course, with state governance and governance of national institutions. It obviously varies by country, but how would you describe the current state of governance on the African continent? What are you most encouraged by? And conversely, what are you most concerned about?
Over the last 15 years or so, we have data from year 2001, 2002. So we have about 18 years or 19 years of data. There have been a marked improvement in governance, especially in the first 10 years of our work. Then we started to see stagnation, and which is rather unfortunate. So those warning signs, 3/4 of our people today live in a better governed societies than 20 years ago. So that's a step forward. But it has been slow, and in times it has been stagnant. And that is worrying. So it is hard work. We have to keep pushing. We have to, to move things forward. Thanks God, we're not going backwards. We're just stagnating, but that's not good enough.
Okay, good. Well, no conversation would be complete in these days without mentioning the C word. So do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to have a lasting impact on how people around the world think about the role of private philanthropy in responding to global challenges? And what other lasting impacts do you expect the COVID-19 pandemic to have on the sector?
I think to start with, it's a very strange situation and strange times. Apparently, the economic impact of the virus is far greater than the health impact, actually. In Africa, we have lost about 35,000 lives. That's out of 1.2, 1.3 billion people. Actually, we lose almost just below 400,000 people every year to malaria. So just look at the two numbers. Every year, we lose 400,000 people to malaria, and nobody talk about this. Nobody talk about this. Yes, some people and some philanthropists are doing some work, especially Gates Foundation doing a lot of good work in the malaria area, and the global funds and the various people doing some good stuff there, but it's not, it obviously is not enough because it's still losing a lot of people. So the health impact is far less, in my view, than the economic impact. That is a severe one, which we are reeling from. Wealthy countries responded by writing big checks, and they had no problem creating debt or just printing money. In the emerging world, in Africa specifically, we don't have that fiscal space. So the impact on Africa is really severe. Mm-hmm. And the progress of the last 15 years is really in danger now. And unlike previous crises, I mean, when we had the banking crisis in 2009, there was some leadership. And we all recall how G20 played a very decisive role there. And one has to really appreciate the unsung hero of that crisis, who was Gordon Brown, who really drove the G20. The meeting was in London and he was chairing. He drove the G20 really to act decisively. There was leadership. This time, there is no international leadership to really drive this. This is a huge event. Philanthropy its own cannot really play a major role there. The capacities required is far greater than the resources available to philanthropists. Yes, they help, but it is just a fraction of what is needed. So I'm really worried about the economic impact. And now, as you see a second wave starting, clearly we have to live with this for some time. And many countries now thinking of another lockups and another curtailing of any economic activities. And this is also going to be a big problem. Yeah. So we are between the rock and the hard places, you know. It's a rather unfortunate situation. But one thing Badr is this emphasized to us. First, our vulnerability as human beings. We need to be, you know, this small piece of routine really humbled us as a human race. We thought that we are, you know, we are mighty. We masters of this universe, and we're sending rockets to Mars to burn and do. And then this little thing is just played havoc with us. It also shows the lack of preparedness. We're not prepared. Our health systems are inadequate, completely underfunded. And this is not only in the emerging countries. You can see rich countries. I mean, the main worries is, will our health system collapse? That was the main worry in UK, Europe, France, and because we did not prepare ourselves for such a pandemic. Imagine if the mortality rates were higher, because at the end, this virus is really benign. Mortality rates is below 1%. Imagine this was something more serious, and what what would have happened to us? I hope this emphasize and our limitation as one of the species which live in this planet. We need to pay more respect really to the environment around us, and otherwise we're in danger.
Absolutely. And as you wisely say, Dr. Ibrahim, leadership and fundamentally management is ultimately what the world needs more of, and is sometimes, unfortunately, in short supply. You mentioned, of course, the fact that philanthropy on its own can't do anything. And I think, if you see capital as a group of siloed actors, then that in itself misses a huge opportunity, because each of those pools of capital, I think, can help the other go further. So this concept of blended capital, where together you are greater than the sum of your parts, and you can use one perhaps to try and de-risk aspects for the other, I think is where the opportunity lies. And philanthropy seems to have been sort of, I refer to it as the forgotten child of the capital system, almost seen as a sort of periphery player. But there are hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, that are disbursed in philanthropic capital. But more often than not, exactly as you've said, it's sort of off the radar screen. So if we're not able to properly institutionalize it and bring the right transparency and accountability towards the investment of that capital in tandem with other forms of capital, then we're going to have muted impact, if not even in some cases unintentional destructive impact, where we're actually doing, making a problem worse unintentionally than making it better. But I wanted to ask you about technology. You obviously have a lot of experience in telecoms and networks. How is the so-called information age changing the nature of giving today, in your view? And how can strategic philanthropists harness the power of these technologies in the most effective way? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think really technology and the recent development is almost changing our lives. Suddenly we discover that we are much more connected than ever before. And if there is a positive coming from this pandemic, is the fact that we even discovered that we can teach or study or go to school online. We discover we can buy our stuff online. We can communicate with others. Here we are, we're having an interesting conversation online. In the past, one of us would have to travel 4,000 miles in order for us to sit down and have a talk. We have quite a reasonable talk online. Of course, we lack a little bit of humanity there, the human touch, or to shake hand, to hug, or whatever. But the contents are there. Still, we can communicate. So that really opened for us a lot of opportunities. We are more aware of what's going around us in the world. Today, something happened in Vietnam, in China, in India, or in the United States, we're all into it. So it's bringing us really closer together. It makes much easier for us to organize ourselves and to act. It's very easy to bring a group of people together on the internet to organize something or to cooperate in doing something. So operationally, it helps us a lot. And also it cuts the cost of acting together. because that can be done really at almost at zero cost. So that opens a lot of venues for us in order to act together, to organize together, to learn from each other. So yes, technology affecting all aspects of our life, including, of course, philanthropy now.
One more thing on leadership. You know, your leadership, fellowship, and scholarship programs are committed to identifying and mentoring promising leaders in a range of fields, I think. What's different about emerging leaders of today compared to when you first embarked on your own career?
I think younger generation now are better equipped to deal with issues of society than ourselves. Because, let me give you an example. When I was a young man in Sudan, and that was many, many years ago, we had only one TV channel. It's run by the government, okay? And the first item in the news was always what the president had for lunch or whom he met with whom, and it's just meaningless. And so the flow of information, in all our countries, we had a ministry called Ministry of Information. So information is controlled by a government ministry. And this minister's job is to inform us. What he chooses to tell us is what we had to receive, and that's it. So our channels of information is very difficult. The newspaper, one was owned by the army, one was owned by the government. There's only one maybe or two which are independent. But again, they have to be careful what they publish or what they say. Our chance to get information was to go on at that time to buy Newsweek was very popular at the time, and Time magazine were quite popular. But this sometimes also doesn't arrive, you know. But you try to listen to the BBC because they had a good well service at that time. They're cutting costs now, so anyway. So our access to information was really limited, and in many cases, effectively censored, whether by design or just as a byproduct by this narrow channel of flow of information. Today, information is everywhere. Actually, we have information fatigue because we cannot process all this information available to us. I just did it on my computer and I have obtained things to see there from various, news channels to YouTube to WhatsApp to some personal, some organized, some. We have the news of information. We are buried under the. Our problem now is not information, but processing of the information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you say, technology, isn't, or ultimately technology isn't the agent of change. We, the connected people, are the agents of change. And time will tell whether we've used technology for the betterment of humanity and our planet, or just to exacerbate our own human flaws.
Absolutely. But also, let's use first names if you don't mind. It's much easier. Please don't call me doctor. One aspect also, which is of interest, our issues, the scope of our issues in our time was very limited. For most of us, the main issue was independence. How to get rid of the colonial rule. Okay, so matters are simple. There's a colonial power there, and you are fighting for independence. And it's not difficult. Things are clear, they're marked, and you know what are the lines there. Today, it's a much more complex world where we are now fighting in multi-fronts now. Development, what does it mean development? Human rights, climate change. There is so many issues around us, which requires an array of policies. So is a much more complex world
Absolutely.
now those young leaders have to deal with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So finally, for the aspiring philanthropists out there that are watching this, any tips or tricks, if you can impart in relation to the what, where, and perhaps importantly, the how of giving?
I think uh, we need to try to, as you mentioned, I mean, the word is strategic. What are we trying to do with our philanthropy? What's the objective? Who want to help and how want to help? When we started our foundation, and because we made some money in Africa from business, and we said, well, let us give back to Africa. In what way to give back? There's a number of options in front of us. Uh, we have a lot of refugees in camps. We can take baby milk, blankets, etc., and give to people. That is wonderful. We can open some schools to help educate young generation. That is amazing. But the question we faced was, and that's specific to Africa, we said, hold on, why we have so many poor people? That's the question. Why we have so many poor people? What is wrong with Africa? And you look at Africa, and it's a rich continent. And the number of people living in Africa are very small, actually, because Africa is a huge continent. You know, we have less people than the Chinese or the Indian people, and you can take India and China and America and Europe and put it in Africa to have more space. So why are we poor? And Mandela used to say a that's a very interesting statement when he said, Africa is rich, but Africans are poor. And we say, that's interesting. Why? And the answer we came up with was probably the reason is the government, the way we run our countries.
Governance?
Or misrun it. Yes, it's governance.
Mm-hmm.
It's governance and leadership. That is the problem with our countries. That's why we are backward. I mean, many African countries were far better than South Korea, far better than China, far better than Malaysia at the time of independence. If you go back to 48, 50, 55, GDP or per capita in Africa was higher than many of those countries. So why these countries have moved now to a much higher level of development and we are still backwards? And clearly it is the governance. So always say, hey, it is the governance is stupid, that is the point. So we decided to focus on that area. For the first instance, you will say, oh, but this is not philanthropy. I think it's probably a higher form of philanthropy because in able to help the poor, we need to change what is happening in the country. That is the best way to improve the education system, to use the health system, etc., by real governance and self-reliance on our resources, which should be fine.
Sure. No, it's a philanthropic investment in infrastructure, and absolutely. And without solid and resilient infrastructure, everything built above it will be weak and will be susceptible to corruption and all the other ills of society and the economy.
By fighting corruption, supporting good leadership, trying to improve governance, we thought that is the best way to help the poor in our countries. So, although our work doesn't look like giving because we are not grants giving, we don't give grants, but except the scholarships or some things there. But we believe we are helping the poor in a very significant way by the big system of governance. So for young philanthropists, really think what you're trying to achieve and what is the best way to achieve that. It's a direct attack, it's indirect attack at the problem. is leveraging, is collaborating, is how to achieve what you want to do in the most effective way. You want a big bang for every dollar you put on the table. And it's like business. It's an
Precisely.
investment. It's
And
an
the
investment
example you, absolutely.
an investment in the human beings. Wonderful investment.
Absolutely. And the example you gave is really what strategic philanthropy is all about. And so really on that basis, as always, refreshingly sincere and insightful. Dear Mohammed, thank you once again for your time, your experience, and of course your friendship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Badr, and thank you very much for what you're trying to do. That is a great stuff you're trying to do there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Taslim. Thank you.